The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floors, its domed ceiling reaching heights that would dwarf most planetary structures. Representatives from over 400 species filled the massive space, their varied forms creating a tapestry of alien diversity that had taken millennia to assemble. The strongest, most advanced civilizations occupied the front rows, their massive forms and technological augmentations marking them as the galaxy's elite. The Krillian Empire held the first row, their 12-foot-tall crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns that hurt lesser species' eyes to observe directly. Behind them sat the Vorthak Collective, cybernetic beings whose mechanical limbs could crush starship hulls with casual gestures. The third row belonged to the Zephyrian hegemony, energy beings who existed in containment suits that hummed with power, capable of igniting entire solar systems. Each species had earned their position through demonstrations of strength, technological supremacy, or psychic dominance. The seating arrangement wasn't ceremonial. It was a carefully calculated hierarchy based on measurable power, military might, economic influence, technological advancement, and individual physical capabilities all factored into the complex formula that determined where each delegation sat. In the very back row, almost lost in the shadows cast by the towering aliens before them, sat 3 humans: Ambassador Sarah Chen, military advisor Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, and xenobiologist Dr. Elena Volkov occupied simple chairs that looked like children's furniture, compared to the massive throne-like structures around them. Their small forms, barely reaching 6 feet in height, seemed insignificant among beings who measured their stature in meters rather than feet. The other species barely acknowledged the human presence. To most of the galaxy, humanity was a curiosity, a young species that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel despite lacking any notable evolutionary advantages. They possessed no natural armor plating like the Thrakari, no psychic abilities like the Mindari, no technological integration like the cybernetic collectives. They were, by all measurable standards, physically weak, technologically primitive, and strategically irrelevant. Commander Zith of the Krillian Empire turned his massive crystalline head toward his aide, the movement creating musical chimes that echoed through the chamber. "Why do the humans always choose the back row?" he asked, his voice resonating through harmonic frequencies that most species felt in their bones. Every session, every gathering, they positioned themselves at the maximum distance from the speakers and decision-makers. The aide, a smaller Krillian with amber-tinted crystal formations, consulted his data tablet. "Unknown, Commander." Their seating position was initially assigned based on their Civilization Index score, Class 3 technology, minimal military presence, no notable psychic or physical enhancements. However, they have never requested reassignment or challenged the arrangement. General Vorthak Prime, leader of the collective's delegation, overheard the conversation through his enhanced audio receptors. His mechanical head swiveled with a soft whir of servos. "Perhaps they understand their place," he commented, his synthetic voice cutting through the ambient noise of the chamber. Primitive species often display instinctive submission behaviors when confronted with superior forms of life. High Executor Zeph 9 of the hegemony materialized partially outside his containment suit, his energy form crackling with barely contained power. Their positioning strategy lacks logic. In our observations of over 300 species, all demonstrate territorial behavior patterns, seeking proximity to power sources, attempting to maximize their perceived status through positioning. These humans exhibit no such drives. Dr. Elena Volkov adjusted her simple translation device, unaware that several of the galaxy's most powerful beings were discussing humanity's seating preferences. She was focused on her tablet, reviewing biological data on the 17 new species that had joined the Council since humanity's last attendance. Each entry fascinated her: the breathing patterns of the methane-based sulfurians, the electromagnetic communication methods of the plasmoids, the symbiotic relationships that defined collective species. Colonel Rodriguez maintained his military bearing, despite the overwhelming display of alien power surrounding them. His trained eyes continuously scanned the chamber, noting defensive positions, potential threats, and escape routes with the automatic precision of a career soldier. To observers, he appeared relaxed, but his mind was calculating engagement scenarios with the methodical precision that had served him through countless conflicts. Ambassador. Chen was listening to the opening statements being delivered by Counselor Supreme Thyrak, a being whose species name was unpronounceable by human vocal cords. The translation was slightly delayed, but she had learned to compensate for the lag while maintaining diplomatic focus. Her small notebook, an archaic tool by galactic standards, filled with careful observations about interspecies, dynamics and political undercurrents, none of the humans seemed bothered by their distant seating arrangement. They didn't strain to see the speakers better, didn't request enhanced audio feeds, and didn't display any of the restless energy that other back row species showed. The Gorvani delegation, seated 2 rows ahead of the humans, constantly shifted and craned their thick necks to maintain visual contact with the proceedings. The insectoid Chitauri clicked their mandibles in agitation whenever larger species blocked their view. But the humans simply sat quietly, observing everything with the patient attention of students in a lecture hall. Ambassador Chen occasionally made notes. Dr. Volkov periodically checked her data readings. Colonel Rodriguez maintained his alert posture while somehow managing to appear completely at ease. This behavior pattern had repeated itself for the 7 years since humanity had gained council membership. Every gathering, every session, every diplomatic function, humans gravitated toward the back of any assembly. They never complained about their positioning, never demanded better accommodations, and never seemed dissatisfied with their status. What the other species didn't understand, couldn't comprehend through their frameworks of power and dominance, was that humans weren't sitting in the back because they had been placed there. They were choosing the back row for reasons that would soon change everything the galaxy thought it knew about this small, seemingly insignificant species. Dr. Elena Volkov had been studying alien behavior patterns for 15 years, but the Galactic Council chambers provided an unprecedented laboratory. From the back row, she could observe the entire assembly without obstruction, watching interaction patterns that front row species missed entirely. Her research had begun as simple xenobiology, but had evolved into something far more comprehensive, a complete behavioral analysis of galactic civilization. The positioning advantage hadn't been immediately obvious to humanity's first council delegation. Ambassador Chen's predecessor had actually complained about the seating arrangement, filing formal protests about humanity's placement. Those requests had been politely ignored by council administrators who saw no reason to accommodate a species that ranked so low on every measurable scale. But Chen had recognized something her predecessor missed. The back row offered a strategic advantage that no other species had discovered. From their elevated position at the chamber's rear, the human delegation could see everything. When the Krillian commander leaned toward his aide to whisper private communications, Elena noticed the subtle color changes in his crystal structure that indicated emotional states. When the Vorthak general's mechanical components generated specific electromagnetic signatures, she recorded the patterns that preceded his most aggressive policy statements. When energy beings like the Zephyrians briefly materialized outside their containment suits, she documented the environmental conditions that triggered these displays. Colonel Rodriguez had initially approached the seating situation from a military perspective, but his observations had yielded unexpected intelligence. The back row provided perfect sight lines to every delegation, allowing him to monitor security protocols, identify ranking structures, and track alliance patterns that weren't apparent from the front rows. He watched how the Thrakari delegation automatically formed defensive formations when certain topics arose. He noticed how the psychic species unconsciously grouped themselves into proximity clusters during heated debates. Most importantly, he observed how the front row species were so focused on projecting power toward the speakers that they ignored everything happening behind them. The galaxy's strongest civilizations had created a blind spot that humans were perfectly positioned to exploit. Ambassador Chen had recognized the diplomatic implications immediately. While other delegations focused on grand speeches and power displays, she could study the real decision-making process. She watched how alliance votes were coordinated through subtle gesture languages. She noticed which species held private conferences during recess periods. She tracked the flow of information through informal networks that determined council outcomes long before formal votes occurred. The humans had discovered that galactic politics operated on 2 levels: The visible layer consisted of official speeches, formal presentations, and recorded votes, the performance that front-row species participated in and dominated. But underneath ran a complex web of informal communications, alliance negotiations, and behind-the-scenes deal-making that actually determined policy outcomes. "Look at Section 7, Elena whispered to her colleagues, using a barely audible tone that her translation device converted to text on their shared displays. "The Moldaxi delegation is using biochemical signals to coordinate with the Spirin cluster. Watch the tentacle color changes. They're voting as a block on the mining rights proposal." Colonel Rodriguez's trained eyes followed her guidance, immediately recognizing the pattern. "Confirmed. I count 14 species maintaining biochemical synchronization. That's enough votes to override the Krillian position if they maintain unity." Ambassador Chen made careful notes while maintaining her diplomatic composure. This intelligence would prove invaluable when humanity's own proposals came up for consideration. While other species focused on convincing the speakers and front-row powers, humans could target the actual decision-making networks. The revelation had transformed humanity's council strategy completely. Instead of attempting to match the power displays and technological demonstrations that other species used to gain influence, humans had developed an entirely different approach. They became the galaxy's premier information brokers, offering insights and intelligence that no other species could provide. The irony was perfect. The galaxy's strongest species had created their hierarchy based on measurable power, but had blindspotted themselves to the information networks that actually controlled their civilization. They could crush starships with their bare hands, manipulate matter at the atomic level, or project consciousness across vast distances, but they couldn't see the political currents flowing directly behind their backs. Dr. Volkov had documented over 300 distinct communication methods used by council species: gesture languages, electromagnetic pulses, biochemical releases, harmonic frequencies, quantum entanglement patterns, and dozens of others. Each species assumed their private communications were secure because they used methods incomprehensible to other life forms. They never considered that one species might be systematically studying and cataloging all of them. The Zephyrian hegemony conducted policy discussions through controlled electromagnetic fluctuations that they believed were undetectable to biological life forms, but Elena's instruments had mapped their entire communication structure within 6 months. The cybernetic collectives used quantum-encrypted data bursts that should have been impossible to intercept without their specific hardware. But Rodriguez had identified the timing patterns that revealed their coordination protocols. Even more remarkable was humanity's discovery of meta-patterns, the larger behavioral flows that emerged from hundreds of individual species interactions. The Council wasn't really controlled by any single powerful civilization. Instead, it operated through a complex ecosystem of mutual dependencies, competitive pressures, and evolutionary adaptations that no individual species fully understood. The Krillians believed they led through technological superiority, but their influence actually derived from their position as neutral mediators between energy-based and matter-based life forms. The Vorthak collective thought their military might determine outcomes, but their real power came from their role as information processors for species that couldn't interface directly with the Council's computational systems. The Zephyrians assumed their energy manipulation abilities made them indispensable, but their true value lay in their capacity to provide independent verification of quantum-level phenomena. From the back row, humans could see how all these elements fit together into something approaching a galactic organism, a vast, complex system that had evolved far beyond the comprehension of its individual components. The strongest species were like muscle tissue, powerful but controlled by neural networks they couldn't perceive. Humans had discovered they could function as the nervous system for a civilization that didn't know it needed one. What made this discovery even more significant was that no other species had thought to look for it. The galaxy's cultures were so focused on individual advancement and species-centric thinking that they had missed the emergence of their own collective intelligence. They were all parts of something larger, but only humans had the perspective to see the whole system. The real transformation began during humanity's second year on the Council, when Ambassador Chen made a seemingly simple suggestion that would revolutionize galactic diplomacy. The Gurnathi-Velen border dispute had deadlocked for 18 months, with both species threatening military action over mining rights to an asteroid cluster. Traditional mediation had failed because neither side trusted the other's technological assessments of the asteroid's mineral content. Perhaps, Chen had suggested during a recess period, the dispute could be resolved through independent verification by a neutral party with no territorial interests in the region. The suggestion seemed logical but unremarkable. Both sides agreed, expecting one of the major powers to provide assessment teams. Instead, Chen proposed that humanity conduct the evaluation. The reaction was immediate skepticism. How could the galaxy's weakest species provide reliable data that the strongest couldn't verify? But Chen had done her homework. From the back row, Dr. Volkov had observed that the Gornathi used primarily electromagnetic scanning methods, while the Velans relied on gravitational analysis. Both species' results were technically accurate, but measured different properties of the same asteroid field. Neither side's technology could verify the other's findings, creating an impasse based on incompatible methodologies rather than conflicting data. Humanity's solution was elegantly simple. They proposed using a combination of both scanning methods, operated by human technicians who had no stake in the outcome and could be trusted by both sides. The process would be completely transparent, with real-time data feeds available to all parties. Most importantly, humans would analyze the combined results using their unique perspective as outside observers. The assessment revealed something unexpected. The asteroid field contained mineral distributions that perfectly complemented each civilization's needs. The Gornathi suitable materials were concentrated in regions that the Velans found difficult to mine, while Velan-accessible deposits were located in areas problematic for Gornathi extraction. Instead of a zero-sum competition, the situation offered opportunities for beneficial cooperation. The resolution that followed marked humanity's first diplomatic success, but more importantly, it established a pattern that would reshape galactic politics. Human mediation became the preferred method for resolving complex disputes, not because of superior technology or military might, but because of their unique analytical perspective and their position outside traditional power structures. Dr. Volkov realized that humanity's observational advantage extended far beyond simple intelligence gathering. They were developing something unprecedented in galactic civilization, a comprehensive understanding of how different species thought, communicated, and made decisions. This knowledge allowed them to identify solutions that other civilizations literally couldn't conceive of. The Caltherian trade war provided the next major test case. For 3 years, 17 different species had been locked in increasingly destructive economic competition over shipping routes through a strategic star cluster. Each species had optimized their approach for their own physiology and technology, creating a tangle of incompatible systems that made efficient trade impossible. Traditional solutions focused on establishing dominant control, determining which species would impose their preferred methods on all others. But humans proposed something entirely different, an integrated system that accommodated every species' unique requirements while maximizing overall efficiency. The proposal seemed impossible. How could you design shipping protocols that worked for energy beings, aquatic species, silicon-based life forms, and dozens of other incompatible biologies? The answer lay in humanity's systematic understanding of interspecies interfaces, knowledge that no other civilization possessed because no other species had made it their specialty. Humans had mapped the functional requirements and limitations of every major galactic species. They understood which life forms could share atmospheric environments, which required specific gravitational conditions, and which needed particular electromagnetic shielding. More importantly, they had identified the underlying patterns that allowed seemingly incompatible systems to interface successfully. The solution involved creating modular trade protocols that automatically adapted to different species requirements while maintaining system-wide efficiency. Ships could follow their preferred routes and use their optimal cargo handling methods, but the overall network coordinated everything through intelligent switching systems that humans would design and operate. The success was dramatic. Trade efficiency increased by 300% within 6 months, while conflicts dropped to negligible levels. Every participating species benefited significantly, but humans gained something more valuable than economic advantage. They became indispensable to galactic commerce. Colonel Rodriguez had been tracking a different pattern. Military conflicts throughout the galaxy followed predictable cycles based on species-specific aggression triggers and territorial behaviors. Most wars weren't caused by genuine resource competition or ideological differences, but by misunderstandings of each other's behavioral patterns and communication styles. The Thrakari, for example, displayed ritual aggression behaviors that their own species understood as diplomatic courtesy, but which most other species interpreted as genuine threats. The crystalline Vorthan communicated through harmonic frequencies that included emotional undertones their species found pleasant, but which drove psychic species into defensive frenzy. These misunderstandings had generated hundreds of unnecessary conflicts over the centuries. Humans began offering pre-conflict mediation services, identifying potential flashpoints before they developed into actual warfare. Their success rate was remarkable. Over 90% of disputes they mediated never escalated to violence. They achieved this not through superior military deterrence, but through precise understanding of what each species actually needed versus what they thought they were fighting for. The pattern extended beyond politics and economics into scientific cooperation. Galactic research had been limited by species-centric approaches that missed opportunities for collaboration. Each civilization developed technologies optimized for their own biology and environmental needs, but rarely considered how different approaches might complement each other. Humans began facilitating joint research projects that combined diverse methodologies in ways that individual species hadn't considered. The results were breakthrough discoveries that advanced galactic science by centuries within just a few years. The key was identifying which species' strengths could compensate for other species' weaknesses, then designing collaborative frameworks that allowed them to work together effectively. What the galaxy was slowly beginning to understand was that humans had discovered something unprecedented, a way to think about civilization itself. While other species focused on advancing their individual cultures and technologies, humans had learned to optimize the interaction networks that connected everyone together. They weren't trying to become the strongest species. They were making every species stronger by improving how they worked together. From the back row, humans had gained a perspective that no front row species could achieve. They could see the whole system instead of just their position within it, and that comprehensive view was becoming the most powerful force in galactic civilization. The council chamber buzzed with unprecedented energy as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for the quarterly session. But something had changed dramatically since humanity's arrival 7 years earlier. Species that had barely acknowledged each other's existence now worked together on collaborative projects. Trade routes that had been battlegrounds were now cooperative networks. Research initiatives that would have been impossible under the old system were producing revolutionary advances. Commander Ziyth of the Krillian Empire found himself in an unusual position. For the first time in his 300-year career, he was not focused primarily on maintaining his species' dominance over lesser civilizations. Instead, he was reviewing collaboration proposals that promised benefits far beyond what traditional conquest could provide. The shift troubled him, not because the results were negative, but because he couldn't understand how it had happened. "Aid," he called, his crystalline voice harmonizing with confusion. "Provide analysis of council efficiency metrics over the past 7 years. The data that appeared on his personal display was startling. Conflict resolutions had increased by 400%. Interspecies trade volume had grown by 600%. Joint scientific projects had produced more breakthrough discoveries than the previous century of individual research efforts. Most remarkably, every major species was reporting significant improvements in their civilization advancement indexes. "These numbers seem impossible," Ziyth muttered, examining the trends carefully. "Galactic civilization doesn't improve this rapidly. Political systems don't become more efficient over short time periods. What variable changed?" His aide, equally puzzled, highlighted one correlation in the data. The improvement curves began approximately 18 months after humanity joined the Council. However, correlation analysis shows no direct causal relationship between human actions and these outcomes. That was the mystery that had begun to obsess the galaxy's most analytical minds. Somehow, the addition of humanity, the weakest, least technologically advanced species in the Council, had triggered a transformation that none of them could explain. The humans weren't leading major initiatives or dominating policy discussions. They still sat in the back row, still participated minimally in formal proceedings, still appeared completely unremarkable by traditional measures. Yet everything was changing around them. General Vorthak Prime had run the statistical analysis 17 times, convinced that his computational systems were malfunctioning. The probability of random improvement in this many areas simultaneously was less than 1 in several trillion. There had to be a systematic cause, but his analysis protocols couldn't identify it. The humans weren't demonstrating superior technology, weren't making military threats, and weren't offering significant economic incentives. What they were doing was far subtler and far more powerful. Dr. Elena Volkov had spent 5 years developing what she privately called species integration theory. Her research had identified the fundamental barriers that prevented different life forms from cooperating effectively. Every species had evolved communication methods, social structures, and problem-solving approaches optimized for their specific biology and environment. These differences weren't mere cultural preferences. They were cognitive frameworks that shaped how each species understood reality itself. The Krillians, with their crystalline neural structures, processed information through harmonic resonance patterns that created perfect mathematical models, but struggled with ambiguity or uncertainty. The Vorthak Collective's cybernetic integration allowed massive parallel processing, but made intuitive leaps nearly impossible. Energy beings like the Zephyrians could manipulate quantum probabilities directly, but had difficulty with linear, sequential thinking. Each species' greatest strengths were also their greatest limitations when trying to work with others. The Krillians' mathematical precision made Zephyrian probability-based logic seem chaotic. The Vorthak's computational power made organic species' intuitive processes appear random and inefficient. Energy beings' quantum thinking patterns were literally incomprehensible to matter-based life forms. But humans had discovered they could function as translators, not just of language, but of entire thought patterns. Their neural architecture was apparently unique in the galaxy, flexible enough to understand radically different cognitive approaches while maintaining coherent integration between them. Colonel Rodriguez had observed this phenomenon in military contexts first. During joint training exercises, different species' tactical approaches had been completely incompatible. Krillian strategies relied on perfect information and mathematical optimization. Thrakari tactics emphasized individual strength and direct confrontation. Chithari methods used swarm coordination and rapid adaptation. Each approach was highly effective within its own context but failed catastrophically when forced to integrate with others. Humans had developed something unprecedented, hybrid tactical doctrines that incorporated multiple species' strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. A human-coordinated fleet could use Krillian mathematical precision for strategic planning, Thrakari aggression for breakthrough attacks, and Chithari adaptability for complex maneuvers, all within a single engagement. The key was that humans weren't trying to force other species to adopt human methods. Instead, they had learned to create framework systems that allowed each species to contribute their natural abilities while maintaining overall coordination. It was like conducting a symphony where every instrument played in a different key, but the conductor somehow made it all harmonize perfectly. Ambassador Chen had begun to understand the broader implications of humanity's unique position. They weren't just mediating individual conflicts or facilitating specific collaborations. They were accidentally rebuilding the fundamental architecture of galactic civilization. For millennia, the galaxy had operated on a competitive hierarchy model. Species advanced by becoming stronger, more technologically sophisticated, or more politically dominant than their neighbors. The entire council system reinforced this approach, seating arrangements based on power rankings, voting weights determined by military and economic strength, resource allocation favoring the most advanced civilizations. But that model had inherent limitations. It encouraged species to focus on individual advancement rather than collective optimization. It created zero-sum thinking where one species' success necessarily meant another's failure. Most critically, it prevented the galaxy from accessing the enormous potential that emerged when different forms of intelligence worked together synergistically. Humans had stumbled onto something revolutionary, a cooperation-based model that generated benefits exceeding the sum of individual contributions. When species combined their unique capabilities instead of competing with them, the results weren't just additive, they were exponential. The pattern was becoming visible to more advanced analytical minds throughout the galaxy. The Mordanian consciousness, a hive mind species with computational abilities rivaling entire cybernetic collectives, had begun mapping the network effects that human mediation created. Their analysis revealed something unprecedented in galactic history: the emergence of genuine, collective intelligence at the civilization level. Individual species were maintaining their cultural identities and biological characteristics, but they were beginning to function as components in a larger system that was more capable than any of them could be independently. Trade networks were becoming more efficient than the most advanced logistics algorithms. Scientific research was accelerating beyond the capabilities of any single species' methods. Even military conflicts, when they occurred, were being resolved through solutions that no individual civilization could have conceived. But the most remarkable aspect was that this transformation was happening naturally, without coercion or central control. Humans weren't forcing change, they were simply providing the missing infrastructure that allowed existing systems to realize their full potential. The galaxy's strongest species were beginning to realize that they had been thinking about power completely wrong. True strength wasn't about individual dominance, it was about enabling collective capability that benefited everyone, including themselves. High Executor F9 materialized fully outside his containment suit for the first time in council chambers, his energy form crackling with patterns that registered concern and fascination across the electromagnetic spectrum. The decision to break protocol spoke to the magnitude of what the Zephyrian hegemony had discovered through their latest analysis of galactic civilization patterns. Fellow council members, his translated voice resonated through the chamber's communication systems. We must address an unprecedented development. Our quantum consciousness analysis has identified a systematic transformation in galactic civilization that requires immediate discussion. The chamber fell silent. Zephyrians rarely spoke during formal sessions, preferring to influence outcomes through behind-the-scenes energy manipulation. For Zeph-9 to request formal floor time indicated something of extraordinary significance. For the past 18 months, the hegemony has been monitoring collective intelligence emergence patterns across our civilization. The results indicate that we are witnessing the spontaneous evolution of a meta-consciousness at the galactic level, a form of collective thinking that incorporates individual species as neural components while maintaining their autonomous existence, Commander. Zizith's crystalline structure shifted to deep amber frequencies, indicating intense analytical focus. Explain the mechanism. Collective consciousness requires shared neural architecture. Our species have incompatible biological and technological foundations. That is precisely what makes this development unprecedented, Zeph-9 replied. Traditional collective consciousness models require unified communication protocols and compatible information processing methods. But this system operates through translation, interfaces that allow incompatible cognitive structures to share information while maintaining their individual characteristics. General Forthak Prime's mechanical systems hummed as he processed the implications. You are suggesting that our civilization has developed nervous system functionality without central coordination. This violates basic cybernetic principles. Someone must be controlling the integration protocols. The energy being's form pulsed with quantum fluctuations that indicated certainty. Our analysis has identified the integration source. The translation interfaces are being provided by a single species that has developed unprecedented cognitive flexibility, the capacity to understand and coordinate between multiple thought pattern types simultaneously. Dr. Elena Volkov felt her heart rate increase as she realized the direction of the conversation. From the back row, she could see delegates throughout the chamber beginning to understand the implications. Hundreds of alien heads were turning toward the human section, and for the first time in 7 years, their small delegation was becoming the center of galactic attention. The humans, breathed Counselor Supreme Thyrak, his massive form shifting to face the back of the chamber directly. You're saying that humans are functioning as neural connectors for our entire civilization? The evidence is conclusive, Zeph-9 confirmed. Every major advancement in interspecies cooperation, every breakthrough in collaborative problem-solving, every successful resolution of complex multi-party conflicts has involved human mediation or facilitation. They have become the communication infrastructure that enables our collective intelligence. Ambassador Chen maintained her diplomatic composure, but internally she was grappling with the magnitude of what was being revealed. Humanity's role in galactic transformation hadn't been accidental or coincidental. They had been systematically enabling something that was reshaping civilization itself. The question was whether this revelation would be seen as a positive development or a threat to established power structures. Commander Zith was already calculating threat assessments. If humans control our coordination infrastructure, they possess unprecedented influence over galactic civilization. This represents a potential security vulnerability that requires immediate evaluation. But Colonel Rodriguez was studying the body language patterns throughout the chamber, and what he observed surprised him. Instead of defensive posturing or aggressive preparation, most species were displaying curiosity and analytical interest. The revelation wasn't triggering territorial responses, it was generating scientific fascination. The Mordanian consciousness spoke through their primary interface, a living ship that served as their mobile embassy. Analysis indicates that human coordination infrastructure enhances, rather than threatens, individual species' capabilities. Our computational modeling shows that every civilization has experienced net positive advancement since integration began. This suggests symbiotic rather than parasitic relationships. Dr. Volkov realized that this was humanity's moment of truth. For 7 years, they had been quietly facilitating galactic cooperation without fully understanding the scope of their impact. Now the galaxy was demanding explanation and accountability. How they responded would determine whether humanity's unique role would be embraced or eliminated. She requested permission to address the chamber, something no human had done since their initial admission presentation. When authorization came through, she stood and activated her translation devices, knowing that her words would be simultaneously converted into hundreds of different communication formats. Honored council members, she began, humanity did not seek to control or manipulate galactic civilization. We discovered our coordination abilities through observation and accident, not through deliberate strategy. Our species appears to have evolved cognitive flexibility as an adaptation to our planet's diverse ecosystem challenges. We learned to understand and work with radically different life forms because Earth required it for survival. She paused, then continued with growing confidence. But what we've learned is that every species in this chamber possesses capabilities that others lack. Krillian mathematical precision, Zephyrian quantum manipulation, Vorthak computational power, Thrakari physical strength. These aren't just individual advantages. They're specialized tools that can solve problems no single species could handle independently, that our chamber buzzed with translation activity as her words were, processed through hundreds of different communication systems. Elena continued, "We don't coordinate your civilization because we control it. We coordinate it because we can see how all the pieces fit together. From our perspective in the back row, we've watched you solve impossible problems by working together, often without realizing you were doing it." High Executor Zeph-9's energy patterns shifted to indicate profound realization. "You're saying that galactic collective intelligence was inevitable once proper coordination infrastructure became available. Humans didn't create it, they enabled it." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "Every species here represents millions of years of evolutionary optimization for specific environments and challenges. When those specializations are allowed to work together instead of competing against each other, the results exceed anything any individual civilization could achieve." General Vorthak Prime's analysis systems completed their assessment. Threat evaluation, negligible. Humans lack the military or technological capacity to impose control through force. Their influence derives entirely from voluntary cooperation by other species. Terminating human coordination would result in net capability loss for all participants. But Commander Zith had reached a different conclusion. This analysis reveals something more significant than human capabilities. It demonstrates that our traditional power hierarchy model has been fundamentally flawed. We have been measuring strength through individual advancement, while ignoring collective optimization potential, the Crystalline Leader's form shifted through a spectrum of colors as he processed the full implications. For millennia, we have competed for front-row positions based on individual species capabilities. But humans have achieved unprecedented influence by enabling others' success, rather than pursuing their own dominance. They have redefined what power means in galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen recognized the critical moment. "Humanity requests no change in our council status or seating arrangements," she announced formally. "We prefer the back row, because it provides the best perspective for understanding how all of you work together. Our role isn't to lead galactic civilization, it's to help you discover what you can accomplish when you combine your strengths." The chamber erupted in communication as hundreds of species began discussing the implications among themselves. But something unprecedented was happening. Instead of fragmenting into competitive factions, the discussions were generating collaborative energy. Species were already beginning to identify new opportunities for cooperation based on the framework Elena had outlined. For the first time in galactic history, the Council was functioning as a genuine collective intelligence, with each species contributing their unique capabilities to shared problem-solving. And at the center of it all, barely visible in the back row, 3 humans were quietly facilitating the birth of something extraordinary. 6 months after the revelation, the Galactic Council had transformed beyond recognition. The physical chamber remained the same, but the social and political dynamics had revolutionized completely. Species that had barely tolerated each other for centuries were now actively seeking collaboration opportunities. The rigid hierarchy that had defined galactic civilization for millennia was dissolving into something fluid, adaptive, and far more powerful. The Krillian Empire had established the first interspecies research collective, combining their mathematical precision with Zephyrian quantum manipulation and Chitauri adaptive algorithms. The results were breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light physics that advanced galactic transportation by several technological generations within months. Commander Zith found himself working more as a coordination facilitator than a military commander, and was surprised to discover he preferred the new role. The humans were correct about specialization optimization, he reported to his home government. Our mathematical modeling capabilities increase exponentially when combined with other species' unique processing methods. We have achieved more scientific advancement in 6 months than in the previous 6 centuries of independent research. But the most dramatic changes were occurring in species that had never possessed significant council influence. The Aquatic Collective, whose water-based biology had limited their participation in predominantly atmospheric civilizations, discovered that their fluid dynamic thinking patterns were perfectly suited for coordinating multi-species logistics networks. Suddenly, beings who had been marginalized for biological incompatibility became essential infrastructure for galactic commerce. The hive mind minorities, species whose collective consciousness had been viewed as primitive compared to advanced individual intelligences, found their coordination abilities in unprecedented demand. When 20 different species needed to collaborate on complex projects, hive mind coordination provided frameworks that made previously impossible cooperation effortless. Dr. Elena Volkov had been appointed as the first director of interspecies integration, a position that didn't exist before humans demonstrated its necessity. Her office had become the busiest location in the council complex, with delegations requesting consultation on everything from trade agreements to joint military exercises to collaborative art projects. The galaxy is discovering that diversity itself is a resource, she explained, to a gathering of species representatives who had requested integration planning assistance. Every difference between your civilizations represents a potential capability that others lack. When those differences are treated as incompatibilities, they become barriers. When they're treated as specializations, they become advantages. The practical applications were staggering. The molten core species, whose extreme temperature requirements had isolated them from most galactic civilization, became partners in stellar engineering projects that required their unique heat tolerance. The microscopic collectives, whose tiny scale had made them nearly invisible to larger species, revolutionized nanotechnology applications by working directly with macro-scale manufacturers. Even the most warlike species were discovering that their aggressive capabilities had value in cooperative contexts. The Thrakari military traditions, previously seen as primitive barbarism by advanced civilizations, became the foundation for defensive strategies protecting collaborative research facilities and trade networks. Their warrior culture was adapting to protect cooperation rather than dominate territories. Colonel Rodriguez had been overwhelmed by requests for his military integration consulting. Conflicts that had seemed intractable under the old competitive model were being resolved through collaborative security approaches that satisfied everyone's defensive needs while eliminating offensive threats. Traditional warfare assumed that one side's security required the other side's vulnerability, he explained to a joint military planning session. But when you understand each species' actual security requirements, you can usually design systems that make everyone safer simultaneously. The border wars between the Gornathi and Velans had become a model case study. Instead of fighting over territory, both species had agreed to joint development projects that gave each access to the resources they needed while maintaining their preferred living environments. The Gornathi got exclusive mineral extraction rights to regions unsuitable for Velan habitation, while the Velans received agricultural development opportunities in areas too radiation-heavy for Gornathi physiology. But the most profound changes were occurring at the conceptual level. The galaxy was reconceptualizing fundamental assumptions about civilization itself. Competition was being replaced by optimization. Dominance hierarchies were evolving into specialization networks. Individual advancement was being supplemented by collective capability development. Ambassador Chen had been invited to address the full council assembly, something no human had done since their initial admission. Her presentation would define humanity's ongoing role in galactic civilization and establish precedents that would influence interspecies relations for centuries. 7 years ago, humanity was assigned to the back row because we ranked lowest on traditional power metrics, she began. Today we understand that our position provided advantages that front row species couldn't access. The question facing this council is whether we're ready to abandon power-based thinking in favor of capability-based cooperation. She activated holographic displays showing the transformation, statistics that every species had been analyzing. Since implementing integration protocols, every civilization represented here has experienced advancement in multiple categories. Scientific discovery rates have increased by an average of 400%. Economic efficiency has improved by 600%. Military conflicts have decreased by 90%, while defensive capabilities have increased dramatically. The numbers were undeniable, but Chen knew that statistics wouldn't determine the outcome. Cultural change required more than evidence, it required vision. The choice before us is simple but profound, she continued. We can return to competitive hierarchy models that limit every species to individual advancement, or we can embrace cooperative optimization that accelerates everyone's development simultaneously. Humans cannot make this decision for you. We can only facilitate whatever approach you choose. High Executor Zeph 9 materialized outside his containment suit, his energy patterns displaying certainty and determination. The Zephyrian hegemony formally endorses the cooperative optimization model. Our quantum consciousness analysis indicates that collective intelligence at the galactic level represents the next phase of civilization evolution. Individual species development is a prerequisite for this advancement, not an alternative to it. General Vorthak Prime's mechanical systems hummed with processing power as he completed real-time analysis of the proposal. The collective concurs. Cybernetic modeling confirms that network effects from interspecies cooperation generate capabilities exceeding individual advancement by several orders of magnitude. We propose immediate implementation of expanded integration protocols. But Commander Zith raised concerns that reflected the anxieties of many traditional power brokers. This transformation requires trust levels unprecedented in galactic history. How do we ensure that cooperative optimization doesn't create vulnerabilities that hostile forces could exploit? Colonel Rodriguez had anticipated this question. The security model changes completely under cooperative systems. Instead of defending against each other, we defend together against external threats. A coordinated galactic defense network would be more powerful than any individual military could overcome. Cooperation doesn't create vulnerability. It creates collective strength. The debate that followed would determine the future of galactic civilization. But from the back row, humans watched with quiet confidence as species after species recognized the advantages of the new paradigm. The transformation had reached critical mass. The galaxy was choosing cooperation over competition because the benefits were undeniable. Humanity had accidentally triggered the greatest advancement in galactic civilization history, not through superior technology or military dominance, but through their unique ability to help others recognize their collective potential. The back row had become the most influential position in the galaxy, and humans intended to stay there. 2 years later, the Galactic Council chamber bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had dominated interspecies relations for millennia. The seating arrangement had evolved into dynamic groupings that shifted based on project needs and collaboration requirements. Species sat with their research partners, trade collaborators, and joint defense coordinators rather than according to power rankings that no longer held meaning. The front row, once reserved for the galaxy's strongest civilizations, now rotated between different species, based on whose expertise was most relevant to current discussions. The microscopic collectives occupied the primary positions during nanotechnology sessions. The aquatic species led discussions about fluid dynamics applications. The energy beings guided quantum physics deliberations. Power had been redefined from dominance over others to excellence in specialized capabilities. But the back row remained constant. Humanity had declined every offer to relocate to more prominent positions, maintaining their observer status by choice rather than assignment. From their elevated perspective, the 3 human representatives continued to facilitate the coordination networks that had become essential infrastructure for galactic civilization. Dr. Elena Volkov had completed the most comprehensive xenobiology study in galactic history, documenting not just individual species characteristics, but the emergent properties that arose when different life forms collaborated. Her research had become required reading at universities throughout the galaxy, fundamentally changing how young beings understood interspecies relationships. We've discovered that biological diversity follows the same optimization principles as technological development, she explained to a gathering of young scientists from 40 different species. Every evolutionary adaptation represents a solution to specific environmental challenges. When those solutions are combined systematically, they create capabilities that transcend what any individual species could achieve. Her students represented the first generation to grow up under the cooperative paradigm. They thought naturally in terms of multi-species collaboration, and viewed biological differences as complementary specializations rather than barriers to understanding. They were already generating research proposals that would have been unthinkable under the old, competitive model. Colonel Rodriguez had been instrumental in developing the integrated defense network that now protected the entire galaxy more effectively than individual military forces ever could. The system utilized each species' unique combat capabilities while eliminating the territorial conflicts that had previously consumed enormous resources. The key insight, he told a joint military academy graduating class, was recognizing that security is fundamentally collaborative. Every species has natural defensive capabilities and strategic advantages. When those are coordinated properly, the resulting network is virtually impenetrable to external threats while requiring minimal resources from any individual civilization. The practical results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Galactic defense spending had decreased by 70%, while protection capabilities had increased dramatically. Former military resources were being redirected to exploration, research, and infrastructure development. The galaxy was discovering how much energy had been wasted on internal competition instead of collective advancement. Ambassador Chen had been appointed as the first interspecies coordination director, a position that formalized humanity's role as civilization facilitators. But she had insisted that the role include representatives from multiple species, ensuring that coordination itself became a collaborative function rather than a human monopoly. Our goal was never to control galactic civilization, she addressed the council. During the formal establishment of the new coordination system, we wanted to help everyone discover what they could accomplish together. That mission succeeds when other species can provide coordination services as effectively as humans can. The Mordanian consciousness had proven particularly adept at large-scale logistics coordination, their hive mind architecture perfectly suited for managing complex multi-species projects. The crystalline entities excelled at information processing and analysis coordination. The energy beings handled quantum-level coordination requirements that biological species couldn't access directly. Humanity's unique contribution remained their ability to understand and translate between radically different cognitive architectures. But instead of being the sole source of such translation, they had begun teaching other species to develop similar capabilities. The galaxy was becoming collectively multilingual in terms of thought patterns and communication methods. The transformation had attracted attention beyond the known galaxy. First contact protocols had been revolutionized by the new cooperative approach. When the Andromeda Collective established communication, instead of the traditional military posturing and competitive displays, the galaxy responded with scientific collaboration offers and cultural exchange proposals. The Andromedans, expecting to encounter the usual territorial and hierarchical civilizations they had found elsewhere in the universe, were astounded by the galactic cooperation model. Their initial contact reports described a civilization that seemed to operate as a unified entity while maintaining unprecedented biological and cultural diversity. "You have achieved something we believed impossible." The Andromedan consciousness communicated through quantum-encrypted channels. Individual species maintaining distinct identities while functioning as components of collective intelligence. Our own attempts at such integration have always resulted in assimilation or fragmentation. Dr. Volkov found herself leading humanity's first intergalactic diplomatic mission, not as representatives of Earth, but as coordination facilitators helping the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies explore collaboration possibilities. The irony wasn't lost on her. The species that had been assigned the back row for being too weak to matter had become ambassadors between galactic civilizations. The meeting took place in the void between galaxies, with representatives from hundreds of Milky Way species joining the first intergalactic council session in known history. The human delegation maintained their traditional back row position, observing and facilitating while others led the formal negotiations. What emerged was a template for intergalactic cooperation, based on the principles that had transformed the Milky Way. Instead of conquest or assimilation, the galaxies would develop exchange programs, joint research initiatives, and collaborative exploration projects. Each galaxy would maintain its distinct characteristics, while contributing to larger-scale advancement. Colonel Rodriguez supervised the establishment of intergalactic defense protocols that protected both civilizations while preventing the kind of arms races that had historically accompanied first contact scenarios. The security framework was based on collective protection principles that eliminated incentives for aggressive expansion. The success was extraordinary. Within months, joint projects were generating discoveries that advanced both galaxies by centuries. Cultural exchange programs were creating new forms of art, music, and literature that incorporated perspectives from hundreds of different species across two galactic civilizations. But perhaps the most significant outcome was philosophical. The universe was discovering that intelligence itself was fundamentally collaborative. Individual consciousness, whether biological, mechanical, or energy-based, reached its full potential only when connected to larger networks of different types of intelligence. From the back row of the first intergalactic council session, Ambassador Chen watched representatives from two galaxies, working together with the same cooperative enthusiasm that had transformed the Milky Way. Humans had accidentally discovered something profound about consciousness and civilization. That diversity wasn't just beneficial, it was essential for reaching the highest levels of intelligence and capability. Sometimes, she murmured to her colleagues, the best view of what's possible comes from sitting in the back and watching everyone else discover their potential. Dr. Volkov smiled, making notes about intergalactic behavioral patterns that were already generating new research ideas. Good thing we learned to like the back row. Something tells me we're going to be spending a lot more time there. The galaxy had learned that true strength wasn't about individual dominance, it was about enabling collective achievement that elevated everyone, and humanity had found their place in the universe not as conquerors or leaders, but as the facilitators who helped intelligence itself reach new heights through cooperation. From the back row, Humans continued to watch and coordinate as consciousness expanded across the stars, proving that sometimes the greatest power comes from helping others discover theirs.